This is part 2 in a mini series on what I eat. I've had a couple of requests from viewers to talk about what I eat, and yes, I do tend to get reactions from folks. I've tended to have for most of my adult life, I've had a BMI 20 to 23. I'm a preventive medicine doc, so folks tend to look at what I'm eating, as well as my other lifestyle habits. And I'll get a couple of different reactions. One is, gosh, you don't eat, you got a lot of restrictions on what you eat. And then when I'm spurging, I get a reaction of, man, you eat like a pig, and then you don't gain weight. The reality is I do have restrictions on my food. I eat out a lot. I've traveled mostly once a week for decades. And if I start adding entrees regularly to my dinner or lunch, I start gaining weight. So I usually have to eat salads. But this is not about restaurant food. This is what I eat at home. The restaurant food was the other video. This is sockeye salmon. It's not a great brand, but again, it's sockeye salmon. What can you do to adulterate that? There's not a lot done to do that. I used to get like 6 servings of salmon per week. Now it's more like 8 or 10. I'll tend to have smoked salmon for breakfast. I'll often have it for a lunch or a snack when I'm at home. Obviously, I don't carry it with me when I'm traveling. And I'll, when I'm making a meal for myself and my family, I'll usually make salmon. Now, so good bit of salmon there. I eat more of this maybe than any one other item. And this is sauteed vegetables. This is sauteed Brussels sprouts. Started with that. For those of you who are dairy haters, yes, I'm guilty. I will sprinkle Parmesan on these, and if I sprinkle the Parmesan while I'm sauteing it, it comes out as a nice little crusty brown stuff. Now, if you're going to say, well, you're getting a lot of calories from cheese, and sometimes I have. Sometimes I've put other types of cheese in there and overloaded it, but not usually. Again, if you go back and you look at my calories, what I usually eat, it's usually the oil. I'll show you a picture of that in just well, actually, I'll show you a picture of that now. Here's the typical thing. That's those sauteed Brussels sprouts. Tons of oil there, and I'll wipe that oil up with Brussels sprout and eat it. So, and I feel the oil around. A lot of oil. Anyway, so I decided that was a great meal. I loved that, so I started doing that with broccoli. The same thing, cutting up fresh broccoli, sauteing it, and sprinkling a little bit of Parmesan on it sometimes. As I mentioned, I will sometimes make meals for myself and Janice, or even meals for myself, Janice, and usually not my son Jeff. He's got more of a fast food, high carb diet. When I make meals for myself and Janice, it's usually salmon, salad, and these olive oil sauteed vegetables. Usually when I'm eating like lunch for myself and I'm at home, it's just a large dish of this and maybe some sugar-free Jell-O. This is not new. I've been sauteing mushrooms for 30, 40 years. It's part of my original plant-based diet. As I said, those of you who think I'm not getting many calories from that dish, again, this reminds me of a quote from a fellow named Gundry. If you look him up on the internet, you'll see a lot of his stuff. He's a cardiovascular surgeon that went into diet and prevention. I don't talk very much and really don't have that much of an opinion regarding his major focus, which is lectins. Although I don't eat a lot of the things that have lectins in them, tomatoes and legumes. However, he's got a quote that I think is very interesting, and I think it's a good quote. He said, food is an excuse or a vehicle to get olive oil into your mouth. Now, enough about the olive oil for now. Let's talk about something else. Avocados have gotten more and more popular, and they're a great source of calories, low-carb calories, low-carb plant-based. So I'm getting more and more avocados these days. And I always had a problem with avocados in terms of getting them while they're fresh, and you know, you have to go back to the grocery store a lot if you do that. Well, they've recently developed a way of providing avocados that keep. They're called holy guacamole, and these things keep in the fridge for weeks if you actually want to keep them that long. Now, as I mentioned a couple of times, I was a major bread fanatic for 30 years. I didn't see another way. I was doing plant-based, low-fat, so I didn't enjoy or eat all of this avocado. A little bit of olive oil, but not a lot. So I got most of my calories from grains. I think in retrospect that was probably a challenge, at least in terms of, you know, if you think about the hormonal theory of weight gain and insulin resistance. I do think my insulin resistance had to do with epigenetics, you know, being born at 10.5 pounds, and a couple of those things. But different issue. Grains. I gave those grains up when I went low-carb plant-based, switched from high-carb plant-based to low-carb plant-based. Had to give up grains. I have recently discovered a way to have biscuits, little breads, which I make out of psyllium husk fiber. Now, as you see here, psyllium husk fiber does have some carbs. However, the carbs are all dietary fiber. And if you look at what we call net carbs, that's actually zero carbs. Most of you viewers understand what net carbs are. If you don't, you can look it up. We've got some, I mentioned it in a couple of other videos as well. But I make these little biscuits now. Speaking of ugly, these biscuits are ugly. You have to have a sense of humor to eat them. And I did put some little chunks of cheese in them. I tried that this time. I didn't realize, even though it was a little chunk of cheese, it was going to melt and spread out all over. These biscuits made out of that psyllium fiber come out a bluish black. So there with that cheese there, it's sort of like the LA Lakers biscuits. Now, I'm not getting a lot of calories out of cheese with that. I can assure you that. For those of you who are hating on me for that, that's not the case. Here's what happens. I freeze those little biscuits. I get one out and microwave it to thaw it out in the morning for breakfast now. Either that or a egg white omelet with mushrooms and veggies and things, and sauteed veggies, and some cheese. And occasionally, again, for critics and haters, I've gone the route of adding some bacon bits back. Loved it, but not a significant source of calorie for the most part, especially as I'm losing weight again. The reason I'm showing this is that's the napkin that I thawed out one of those biscuits in. As you can see, it is just full of olive oil. Yes, I do eat peanut butter, and yes, peanut butter does have some carbs. It's also a legume. Don't eat a lot of it, but again, for transparency's sake, wanted to put that in there. I'll eat that when I'm feeling like I'm not getting enough calories. Speaking of low carb and bad habits, there was a time when I developed a habit of eating crackers. Loved them. For a couple of years, I was eating a lot of crackers. I found some crackers that were about as healthy as you could get, but again, there's still crackers. There are very few crackers that are not low carb. These are 1 gram of carbohydrates in a serving of these wisps, and a whole bag of wisps is 2 servings. I tend to get about 5, 6, 7 servings out of these bags. Now, how can they have crackers that are that low carb? Here's what they are. They're basically toasted Parmesan cheese. So, may not be the prettiest, but you ask what I eat, so that's what I eat. Just want to review something real quick to talk about my own background issues around food. First of all, I came from a family with a difficult culture or discussion around food. Father of 300 was over 350 pounds, even though he was my height, so he had over 2 of me that he was carrying. Holidays, food was everywhere, and most of it desserts. You'd come home on Christmas and it was cakes, pies, fudge, other kind of desserts all over the tables, lining the counters. It was a way for the females in the family mostly, but males too, to show love for the rest of the family. You make them their favorite desserts, and it lays there over the 3 or 4 day period, and people just keep grazing and nibbling on it. It's not surprising, therefore, that my birth weight was 10.5 pounds. As I've mentioned that a couple of times, that's probably an epigenetic problem. Whether it's epigenetics as a mechanism, and I think it is, or not, kids born, we have discovered since then that kids born at over 8.5 pounds are at high risk for developing type 2 diabetes as they get older. My highest weight was 185 pounds. That's not huge by today's standards, but it's 30 pounds over what I am right now. So, and then 30 years of a plant-based diet, but lots of grains. So significant cycling of that insulin reaction. And recently, given all of that background in my head and in my genetics, I recently gave myself a license to eat. 6 months ago, I was struggling to keep up to 150 pounds. Here's why. On a 2-year history of doing intermittent fasting, 6 and 1, with basically a water fast on that one day, I added low carb, then mimicked fasting. And I started having metformin after I developed insulin resistance, and started developing hypoglycemic episodes. Those are dangerous. You do not want to routinely have to deal with hypoglycemic episodes. You put all that together, and I said, I don't want to do that again. So I'm continuing to make a lot of adjustments. As they say, growing old is not for sissies. Thanks for your interest.